Welcome to Soul Thrive, where we explore spirituality through healing trauma, shadow work, and applying the laws of the universe in order to master ourselves without the fear of the unknown. Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode on the Soul Thrive podcast. We have a different setup today. I'm not used to you not being in the studio with me, which is not fun. And then, of course, all the technical stuff that you take care of, everything just went hilariously not working as per usual.
But now you know what to do.
Well, you know what, Ivana? You set up everything usually. You set up the lights, you come in here, you move my whole space around, you set up
all
the light
place
over
was-
here, and I just show up. But yes, today we are learning some new skill sets, which, you know what? It's fine. Just don't make it a habit, okay, my friend? Do you want to just share the topic that we're going to discuss today?
So this is an interesting one because I feel like we've never talked about this concept. We've talked about the concept of inner child, and I think that was our last episode.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was your idea to do the inner teenager now as like a follow-up to the inner child. So
just to correct you, I did do something in Soul Thrive on the inner teenager. I did.
Did you?
I did.
Listen, I am a Virgo, but my memory is not.
That's okay. That's good. I'm glad we're having this conversation because a lot of people don't reference the inner teenager as much as we should. When you're doing inner child work, and it's super profound to put a lot of your energy, and you're always going to revert back to going to the first stage of your initial core wounds and traumas. But the inner teenager plays such a significant role too, because from ages 12 to 18, like that's where you're starting to develop a little bit more of your own autonomy from a completely different concept than what your childhood experiences were. And so there's a whole other range of experiences here that need to be discussed.
I have a question. So does that mean that when you look at the work through the inner teenager lens, you are also going back to that same time frame, and you are now, instead of examining your early years, those early developmental years, now you're examining 12 to 18. So you're looking at those experiences. Are the themes from your inner child world also manifesting throughout your inner teenager?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
Is it basically the same things playing out over and over again? Like how?
Yeah, it is to a degree. Your patterns are going to show up regardless in those years from 12 to 18. But what's happening is there's like a separation from the dependency that you have with your parents to now creating more of your own personal choices and experiences to a degree, depending on the severity of what your relationship dynamics are with your family. But for the most part, your body is changing, your hormones are changing, the way you operate is changing. You're starting to want to belong in different friendship groups, different activities. There's a lot of change that happens. And then in the school system, there's also that teaching you how to view things from a completely different perspective as well. You're learning through your peers, and then you're learning through the educational system as well. And that's impacting your knowledge and understanding around your patterns to a degree. And then, of course, depending on what your emotional spectrum is, you're having this range of not quite understanding all parts of who you are. So there's a huge developmental stage from 12 to 18 where you're like taking a lot of the emotional imprints, the emotional traumas, and now you're responding in some way through different types of relationships outside of your family dynamics. So it gets really, this is why they say hormones alone, teenagers become what we are. You rebel in certain aspects. There's the rebelling against the authority component. But with the fundamental years, your core wounds from your childhood are now being even more amped up and highlighted.
I was going to say, because your environment is so much more complex now. Now you're throwing all these other things.
I mean, I think back to when I was like a teenager. Look, I think back when I was a teenager, and because I grew up so quick and I had to parent my parents, there was a lot of parentification. I actually was like 12, 13, and my objective was like work. Like, you need to make money, you need to work, you need to figure it out. Like, it was never about like fully fitting in a group. I had friends, I was social, I had
Mhm.
multiple different groups here and there. But for me, it really was about the independence. And like, I wasn't a teenager that depended on my parents in any which way. By the time I was like 15, 16, I was out late. Like, I wasn't coming home till, I don't know, midnight, 1 o'clock sometimes on a school night. I,
Great.
well, yeah, but sometimes I was also working, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes I was
Yeah.
working, or sometimes I was on the weekends I was out, or I was sleeping over friends' places. It was a different, I grew up differently, and I grew up with like a different maturity, even though at the same time I wasn't quite mature because you're still a teenager. You only know what you know, right? But the trauma response in me to have to work, to make money, to have a job, to make sure that those fundamental things were like implemented, the responsibility aspect, there was never a moment where I didn't wake up the next day to go to work. Or
Right.
but school was never like the priority for me because I had already struggled with so much with my dyslexia and how that also made me feel a sense of not belonging and rejected. So school just gave me too much anxiety. Whereas going to work and being and knowing that I was making money and knowing that I can afford to pay my phone bill and I can go out on the weekend and buy what I want, there was that sense of liberation for me because I was developing that sense of self, even though I had
Mhm.
no context around money, no context around saving, no context around the stability of what it could create. It was still in operation of that lack, scarcity type of mindset, even in those formative years, which does impact you in a lot of ways. And so if you were in your teenage years hyper focused on one specific thing, if perfectionism was the thing that you had to get all the A's and make sure that you were part of all the teams and make sure that you were achieving and
Add sports
succeeding,
on top of that.
add sports on
Yeah.
top of that. Yeah, which is probably what your childhood was a lot alike. That falls back into the trauma of your
Mhm.
childhood core wound experiences. But now the inner teenager is expressing it in a completely different way. And there are so many layers to what those wounds can and how they do manifest. And often when I've worked with teenagers, because parents will come to me and say, my teenager's rebelling, or there's a situation that's going on. I don't know how to navigate through this. I always have to sit with the parent first to assess, like, when they were kids, what was going on in your reality and how were you parenting them? And what were the responses and the trauma so that I have more context. So when the teenager shows up to me, now I know they're feeling guilty or they're feeling shame or they're in their people pleasing or they're in their perfectionism or they're feeling a sense of rejection. And your hormonal changes and body image issues and all of those factors as well. I mean, 12 to 18, those core fundamental years are a lot for us to navigate through. And we don't, as adults now, we can look back and have a perspective of what those years were, add add so many things like pressure, addictions. It's just it's compounded with so much and it's crammed in such a small window. And then you're forced to mature and choose a career path or school and then become an adult, which is insane, like utterly insane to assume that an 18-year-old child would have any understanding of what they would really do. And most individuals who do go to university or do go get that college degree or whatever, they're still doing it based on their parents' approval to a
Right.
degree.
Right. Right. So as I think about what the teenage years represent, it feels like there's a few aspects that we learn throughout those years that it almost feels like if we don't learn those things as teenagers, we're going to be a little bit, I don't want to say like stunted in our growth as adults. Is that even like a thing?
Yeah, no, the emotional maturity is not there, right? So the
Right.
emotional intelligence and the emotional maturity isn't there. So you could take situations that, for instance, let's say a child was going through addiction, right? Like they went through, I don't know, they drank and then they blacked out, and that was their first moment of whatever that experience is. Often parents will be like, oh, it was just a one off. You know what I mean? Like, let's just But then we're not addressing that there's an issue here that my teenager is going to that degree of blackout. And we're not addressing what that's going to do to their core fundamental years between the ages of 12 to 18. And how is that going to translate as an adult now? I'm just using the extreme of whatever that trauma
Mhm,
response is,
mhm.
that pattern. And then you see often we want to give the leniency in teenagers too, to a degree. If you've got parents, like I had a lot of leniency, right? There was a lot of like, you're growing now and you can make your own choices and these are you should know better. And I was like, I need guidance. Nobody here is guiding me. I'm like arms up in the air floating.
And you had the total
Looking at me.
opposite.
I just get a
Yeah.
vision of that, like, that blow up thing that goes like all over the place. Right? That's how I
It's
felt.
like the car wash.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was in constant, like, chronic stress all the time. I'm sure you could relate to that from your own point of
Yeah.
perspective
So
around
mine was the opposite. Like you see how you said you had so much freedom. I had the opposite. I had so much structure and rigor and rules that needed to be met. The anxiety also came from that. No wonder. But
So you would assume if we were friends back in high school, you'd be like, this girl's running around and like partying and like working and what
well,
stress does she
I had a
have?
friend like that. Now,
And
because
then
now
and
that
I'd be
you're
looking at
saying
you
that,
going, wow, like she's doing so well in school.
I had so my best friend at the time was basically like that. Like she partied a lot and went out, and Sveti was not having it. It was not. It was so bad. So no, I it was like the opposite extreme. But I feel like I gravitated to a lot of those people just because like they had the freedom that I didn't.
But if
But
you examined both perspectives, whatever that may look like, there actually wasn't any freedom. Like it was still coming from uncertainty, unsafety, rebelling against the authority. There was
yeah,
an element of needing to feel a sense of belonging in something, some form of an external validation and approval. And
yeah.
and you could see in both perspectives of what we were operating with based on how we were raised in our trauma, it makes sense the way that we went that we did in those in 12 to 18.
Yeah, no, totally. Because you need the guidance as well. It's almost like you need something in between. It's like we had the two extremes, and what you need is something a little bit more balanced and in between. Because as I think about teenage years, like that's when you really learn, can you be independent? Can you be dependable? What is your identity? What is your expression? You know how sometimes like I wanted to dye my hair and do all this stuff and pluck my eyebrows, and she was like, no way in
You
hell.
weren't allowed to do any of that, eh?
I was not allowed to do any of that. I literally couldn't wait to get out of the house at 17 to then actually start to do what I want to do. None of that was allowed.
Yeah, we were allowed to
Yeah.
do all of that. Like I was allowed to change my hair color. I was paying professional hairdressers at the age of 12, 13 to do my
No.
hair. And like I would go get my nails done. But keep in mind too, I grew up with my mom and my aunt were both estheticians. So
But yeah.
image was a thing. That was from, and all my girlfriends and I that when we were in high school, that's what we did. We went and got our hair done. We went and got our nails done. We went and got our eyebrows done. We went a little too thin. I didn't have those restrictions, but I also, again, didn't have guidance and I didn't have direction and I didn't have the discipline that I needed in order to succeed in other areas. I think I've done well regardless of those experiences. However, I want to hug the teenage version of myself really tight and I want to just give her like so much love because she was struggling in so many ways and depressed. And so I drank a lot back then. I smoked cigarettes back then. You're going to experiment in certain areas. I think, too, what we're trying to find in our teenage years is like our own inner truth or what our personal truth is. And we're all trying to figure out how to navigate what independence may look like for us. And most of the time, it comes with a lot of grievances and feelings of loneliness. And ultimately, yeah, we just want to belong in a community of some sort. And that's why kids, it's so easy to just navigate to the wrong person. But then you could look at experiences like children from of divorce, children who have a really shitty father, children who have a really shitty mother. Like you could see those. I remember because I hung out with kids like that that had my parents were what they were, but they weren't in other extremes. And I saw kids that were like 15, home alone all the time. Their parents were never present. They they just were never there. Like I didn't know how they functioned,
Yeah.
right? Or had these relationships. And it was interesting to watch some of the girls when I look at girls, and it falls into boys too at the teenage years, how they were navigating the relationships and getting into really complicated boyfriend and girlfriend dynamics, and that were such mirrors to childhood trauma and such mirrors to the conflicts that they were in based on core wounds.
So I guess it starts, I mean, it has to start right away. Like those core wounds from your early years are basically starting to manifest in your first relationship as a
Yes.
teenager.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some common wounds then that kind of are are most present when it comes to teenage
Shame,
years?
shame, rejection.
So same,
Uh, yeah, same. Sexuality, right? I mean,
mhm.
like,
I guess body image too, right?
yeah,
Like
body image
Sophia.
for sure. Because then you look at image being such a profound thing, and like when you're a 12 or 13-year-old little girl, because you're still a little girl, you're a teenager,
Mhm.
right? You're not looking like a 25-year-old girl that's like you may have baby fat and you may look different, but comparisons kick in
Oh yeah,
so
that's true.
so
Yeah.
much, right? And the impact of that has on eating disorders, that has on just like leaning into all of that rejection and tied to the relationship with her father. And then I look at children who have core wounds that have gone as far as sexual abuse. And then I could see that playing out through addiction. And I could see that playing out through relationships, getting into sexual relationships at like 12 years old. You're a baby. And I had many girlfriends who were sexually active at like 12, and I didn't understand that. Like for me it was like that's not that doesn't feel good to me. Like, doesn't feel normal for me per se. Like, it wasn't something that was on my radar. Keep in mind, too, to give you guys context, the fear of God was also put in me about like babies and sex. And like, and so in my mind, it was like something bad's going to happen. Right. And so I just didn't go down that path, considering I was such a party girl, rebel, all of that. Like, that wasn't my ammo in any which way. But with image and development and sexuality and wanting connection and wanting love and going through these core wounds, I understand. And a lot
Mhm.
of those girlfriends that I had, their trauma was very evident.
It, just that you can see it now. Nobody can see that when you're that
No,
young.
I saw it then. I saw it
Yeah.
then. And I would often have conversations like I was doing what I do now then. So I may not have had guidance or figured it all out, but I was having those conversations back then with friends where I was like, well, don't you think this is a little strange? Or don't you feel like this is a little too possessive with this person? Or don't you think this is a little weird? But I was like super insecure about myself when I was a teenager, like boys and like feeling pretty. And like it was so much pressure. And I was like, this doesn't feel good. And I was compared to some family friends as well who were a couple of years older than me. And they just looked different. Although side by side, people used to say that we looked very similar, but we often got compared. And that made me feel really shitty because even though I was really skinny, I wasn't as skinny as her. I wasn't as pretty as her. I wasn't as good as her, blah, 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 blah. My mom did that a lot, which she regrets now, but she did do that for
Yeah.
sure.
And what is there such a thing as like healthy rebellion this
Yeah,
time?
I
What
think that there's an element we can look at it in so many different ways. Yes. I think that if there's a family that's really strict, but there isn't like sexual abuse or real big feelings of rejection, could there be some fire against authority and like that fire energy that you need to start to create and define more of yourself? Yeah, absolutely. You are trying to define yourself. You're trying to find your autonomy.
right,
And so
right.
and either way, when we're talking about the traumas of these experiences, they were healthy to a degree, even though they were destructive, because they really are teaching us more about who we are
Right.
and how we operate. And some of them can be really scary. And I'm not going to go into the extreme, but I think that if we examined and looked at those years and then compared where we are right now, you would see hopefully, some radical changes. That's not always the case, though, unfortunately, because that loneliness still lingers, that rejection still lingers, shame still
Mhm.
lingers. And I know a lot of people who still reminisce about the teenage years because they're stuck there. They're stuck in trauma there. And
Wow.
they even hold on to relationships that they have to outgrow that they've been with since their teenage years. They
So you're like, they keep those friendships, like the same
Yeah,
friendships,
there's
even for
nothing
that
wrong
time?
with keeping your friendships, I think, as long as
Yeah.
there's a growth and a development.
Right.
But sometimes I think there is a little bit of a trauma response still there if there's still no real growth as far as those relationships go.
Right. So this is kind of a good segue because I was going to ask, what are some examples of how your unhealed inner teenager shows up in your adult life, basically?
Ooh. Rebelling is number one. I think there's always going to be like a layer of rebellion, speaking up more, talking back more. Or maybe not even talking at all, like disassociating, shutting down, right? Bullying. I think that's a big one too. If you're seeing your child start to develop like bullying tendencies or aggression, addiction's like a huge one. There's the conversation about parents being like, I'd rather you do this with me here or have this experience. You're going to have this experience regardless. That's
Mhm.
fine. Talk about it. That's important. But if you start to see that your child already has an addictive type of personality, you probably should be intervening sooner than later. A lot of emotional neglect, I think, too, plays a significant role in how the teenager is going to behave. You'll see that even in them not taking care of their hygiene or their image to a degree. It shows up in so many facets. And I don't wanna just say it's one area of it kinda happening. I feel like if people were just to even think about their own teenage years, they could probably lay out some really traumatic experiences that impacted them, and then would probably say, "Does this tie into shame? Does this tie into rejection? Does this tie into emotional neglect? Does this tie into any sexual abuse or traumas or even domestic violence is also huge being in a family with domestic violence or experiencing domestic violence. There's a lot there. So it shows up in, interestingly enough, the nervous system goes into like a freeze response because this is why sometimes, like I said, when I'm talking to people and the inner teenager is showing up, it's because there's a freeze response that's going on here. So I have to go back into integrating parts of their inner child when it's time and when they're ready. Other times when we're doing the inner child work and now they're adults and they're for the first time learning how to set boundaries, their inner teenager may show up. The anger,
Mhm.
the authority, the rage.
Right. Because the child can't do that.
So
The
we come
boundaries
in.
start at teenage years.
Exactly. Well, no, they start at the age of 2. Boundaries start at the age of 2, but you
So
don't
your
have.
ability to exercise them.
Exactly. So
Right.
and then you're creating more of that autonomy at that older age than a 2-year-old, but now you're an adult who has never had boundaries, and now you're doing the inner child work. Your inner teenager is gonna come in with the fire and the authority and the rage and that anger and all of that stuff. Be a bad thing or a good thing, right? We have to reparent even the inner child. We have to go back and make them understand like they don't have to operate from unsafety. They can operate from a safe place. And we also have to give them more context because it can come in as forms of protectors and sometimes amp up the resistance in us than actual integration.
Right. So I know that like we've done inner child work and it's usually always goes back to a very young version. I don't think I've ever had an inner teenager show up.
Because I think when people's inner teenager shows up, again, it's because there's an aspect of you as an adult that's still having a complex issue with executing and embodying the change. And you're not having that conflict. Like you're willing to say, my core wounds coming from this perspective,
Mhm.
and now my inner teenager is on board with that. And now my adult version has created safety for both perspectives or more perspectives. Because we talk about fragmentation, we talk about multiple
Mhm.
versions of this
Mhm.
experience, right? I think when you're doing more of the deeper work, then
Mhm.
the inner teenager is already there energetically. And like that energy, when you're hitting the core wound of it, is affecting everything up until you're an adult. But it's the adult that's dictating what's going to happen as far as the inner child. I don't know if I can get to that pain or that version of me to that degree because it's just too
Mm.
much.
I'm gonna go through the teenage
I'm
years.
gonna go. Sometimes it's not even the teenager. Sometimes I'm meeting the 25-year-old version of yourself or the 22-year-old version of yourself before we even hit the teenage version of yourself. And then we go teenager, younger version.
Got it.
It's kind of like a protector. Like your inner teenager shows up as like a buffer, a protector, a parent for you that you didn't have. What's important is that we're understanding that the only reason the inner teenager is showing up is because me as an adult still hasn't emotionally regulated and I haven't adapted or created more emotional intelligence. I'm still operating like a 13-year-old. Technically, I'm still operating like a 3-year-old, but my rebellion, my behavior, my coping mechanisms, my triggers, my patterns are still from the age of 12 to 18.
Okay, so let me just make sure I'm understanding this. So, if we've had trauma in our teenage years that we haven't integrated as adults, that's where I'm sure we've all seen it with certain people when you look at them and they're grown ass people and you're like, why are they acting like a 15-year-old? It's basically because what they're stuck in that time frame in that trauma and they just didn't evolve. So you can't really go straight to inner child work. Like you have to go visit that teenage version, integrate that, and then go into the younger. Okay. And no, this is helpful because I feel like there are certain themes from your teenage years that are different from your inner child years. So like you
But they're
can,
the same feeling.
right. I'm just saying how
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. If you're like defensive or
Yes.
rebellious, like I don't remember myself being that way as a child. I'm sure I was as a child, but I think I have more memory or context around that as a teenager. I don't know if I'm explaining this
Yeah,
correct.
no, you do because at that point you're trying to protect the younger versions of yourself based on the pain that you've gone through and the trauma that you're going through. And then at the same time, you have a little bit more of that fire and energy because there's a split, there's an independence. Now you're a little bit more of the adults, right? Which technically you're not, you're just a teenager, but they're giving you more leniency. You're going to school, you're part of programs, you're connecting with different people. So they're like, I
You
don't
have a
have
life outside of your parents, basically,
exactly,
right?
because you're creating that
Yeah.
autonomy, right? You're creating those experiences for yourself. So now you feel like you can say a little bit more, you can speak up. But I would question if you came home after school and you had to have a really educated approach and conversation with your parents to make them feel like the way that they're handling situations or the way that they're communicating. Did you come with them with more like political views or like things that you were learning in school and kind of wanted to have like conversations with them around like connecting with them on those terms? Cause like I didn't have that. I know some people like when they sit and have dinner, we didn't even sit and have dinner together. Like I grew up where like we were so fast paced in and out of my house. Like everyone was working, everyone was busy. We were in and out. So our conversations were always yelling and screaming. Whereas like sometimes I'd go to a friend's house and I would be sitting at dinner and I would see that my friend would make it a point to try to win her dad's approval through conversation, that I'm so educated now that I'm trying to connect with you from this perspective. Can you see and validate how smart I am right now? And like, do you approve of me kind of
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't recall that. Like, I don't think I wanted to talk to them much.
Well, there's also that too, where you're just like lock yourself in the room and I want nothing to do with anyone, which
Yeah.
is the emo version of being a teenager, anyways, because you're so like your emotions at that age from 12 to 18 are really heightened.
Yeah. But that makes sense because I know that sometimes I can react that way even now. It's like I go towards isolation when I don't
Yeah.
deal with certain things. So I
Hmm.
did used to do that. I would go and journal, or I would go to my room and just go sit by myself. And even today, I'm like, I have no problem being by myself, right?
Yeah,
But
but we
I do know that I
identified
go
that's
into the
also a
extreme.
core
Yeah,
wound and a
yeah,
limited belief that you operate with. And
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so that isolation and all of that makes
Well,
sense.
it's the only way I knew how to remove myself from that environment back then,
Yeah, it was
because
also the
you
way that
live with them.
you knew how to regulate yourself too. I mean, like how does a teenager regulate themselves as well when they can't just run up to their mommy and ask for a hug.
You
Sometimes
got
that's
to
not.
go on your own.
You didn't
Like,
even get a hug when you were like 3. You're gonna go get a hug when you're a teenager now? When emotions and like context and understanding, like I think to myself, if only more people just sat down and had a conversation with me and made me understand things from a different perspective, but nobody did.
yeah, no, I know.
So you also okay,
I
so I here are some things that I just want to clarify as far as how an unhealed teenage version of you would show up in adulthood. Okay? So reactivity when told what to do or feelings of being criticized, avoiding responsibility, stuck in I don't care energy, over identifying with rebellion, needing to prove something, fear of rejection leading to self sabotage, using substances, sex, or to anything to escape so you're just not coping, feeling emotionally stuck between independence and connection, which often comes back to what you were just referring to, difficult trusting others or forming healthy relationships. Well, that sums up your whole entire teenage years. And if you didn't get that lesson right at that time, and those traumas and experiences were coming from your childhood, you are repeating them as an adult. This area is developing your solar plexus area because that's your core center of your sense of self, willpower, motivation, discipline, and also connected to your nervous system in a lot of ways too. And this area, if it isn't fully developed in your teenage years, you're going to have a really hard time with power and direction. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Hmm.
And now to heal it.
Now to heal it, I would probably look at how you're operating right now as an adult and then maybe draw some parallels to how you were as a teenager. Maybe also draw some parallels when it comes to your emotions as a teenager. Are you still feeling that loneliness? Are you still feeling that disconnection, that disassociation, that unsafety, that rejection, comparison, all of that stuff, right? Maybe there was even a version of you that was a little bit more confident back then. Because I know there was a part of me that was a little bit more of like, had no fear and wanted to take risks in different areas. And I still have a little bit of that element in me now, still in consideration to the work and the things that I want to do. Look at the positives as well. I'm not saying just list out all the negatives because there could be a version of you as a teenager that we need to hone in a little bit more. But then of course, we always want to go back to the inner child and really understand what the traumas are and how they played themselves out all over again. And now they're still forming a version of me that's struggling with that sense of self, struggling with my power, struggling with my boundaries and the direction that I want to go in and the changes that I want to make. I have literally worked with so many people, and sometimes I can see where, I mean, I can see the core wounds when they're coming from their childhood, but I can also see when a massive trauma occurs in their 12 to 18 and it wasn't resolved and they're literally their nervous system is stuck in that and it's on
Mhm.
loop over and over and over again. And I can't access that until they also become aware of like that experience for themselves. Sometimes I do. But for the most part, the inner teenager has to trust me enough to allow me. And sometimes when I've worked with clients who I know that I have to go to this area and their inner child and their inner teenager shows up and they're like, nope, you're not coming near this. There is a defense mechanism that comes in. And so we have to recognize that. And I know on my end, when I'm working with people, I have to be very, very mindful of that. So if you're working with a shadow worker or you're choosing to work with someone who does soul retrieval, be mindful that if you're super angry or your feelings are of unsafety or you're acting a little like a teenager, maybe this is just your protector coming in that's causing the block from getting to the core wound. I think that reclaiming your voice is also really important because as a teenager, we want to be heard, we want to be understood. That's important. So if you're having any struggles with that as an adult, that too is a good place to start. I'm always going to recommend like journaling and writing it down, but maybe what I would do too, especially because tone in the way you communicate matters. And everyone's like, you use that tone with me, la, la, la. You know how people get like, oh, it's triggered with certain tones, right? But if you want to develop more of an authority in your voice, record yourself talking. Write down stuff of things that you want to say and record yourself talking and then listen to it. And then record yourself again in a different tone and listen to that as well. So that you can start to develop a good range around what what sounds more of like a compassionate authority than a defensive, you need to change and hear me, right? So that you gain more context around how you communicate to people. Because that's going to help you really make people feel safe with you, you safe with them. And then maybe someone will actually hear you from a completely different perspective because tone plays a significant role. And I hear this a lot too when people have a lot of inner child trauma. Their tones, they're soft and they can act like baby voices and they get really like this. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much fucking trauma here. Please don't talk like that. Let's just deal with this so that we can actually integrate this from a better perspective. Sorry, I know I got a little aggressive there because there's a lot of people that operate like that. So I need you to record yourself and hear yourself how you're communicating and then ask yourself, like, is this your actual voice? This is super important. Okay. Especially with boundaries. And then of course there's like fun things. You know, you were a teenager too and you did fun things. You tried sports and you were more active, or you did drama, or you did dance, or you did swim, or you did whatever. Incorporate some of those activities back into your life. I think that is also really important.
Is that a way of meeting the teenager all over again?
Yeah.
Through those activities as well?
Yeah, well, your inner child at the end of the day too, right? Fundamentally what you're looking for, you're looking to heal that version of you as best as you can. And we don't just allow the inner child, inner teenager to show up. We want it to integrate into an adult. We want the inner teenager to become an adult, but in the right way through so much context, so much information, so on and so forth. And I think that's pretty much it. Sorry, guys, if you hear Ollie barking in the background, but that's what's happening right now. All right, guys. I think that's good for today. Okay. Have a good one, guys.